Good morning. My name is Liang Xiaolin. Welcome to the webinar. I'm with the Institute of Food Production and Sustainability, which is one of the 4 institutes under NIFA. And we'll transition to the presentation now. Today, I'll be talking about FASE proposals. FASE stands for Food and Agriculture Science Enhancement. It's a kind of strengthening or capacity building program. Before I start, I want to point out that FASE is only found in AFRI. If you are not managing an AFRI program, you don't have to listen to this presentation. Today we'll cover the following topics. First, the goals of FASE, who benefits from FASE or who is eligible for FASE, and what options exist for FASE grants, and how different FASE awards are reviewed and selected. The good news is you don't need to be an expert on all this because your NPL is supposed to be the expert. The goals of FASE include strengthening science capabilities in research, education, and/or extension programs, help less successful institutions develop competitive projects, and attract new scientists into careers in high priority areas of national need. FASE grants offer special opportunities for the following entities. First, USDA AppScore states and entities. I'm sure many of you are familiar with AppScore. It originated in NSF many years ago, and many other federal agencies also have AppScore or AppScore-like program. We at NIFA have an AppScore-like program. AppScore used to stand for Experimental Program to Stimulate Competitive Research, but since it's been around for so long, it's no longer experimental. So recently, Congress changed the E to established, but the acronym remains the same, AppScore. The second category is small and mid-sized institutions, academic institutions with limited institutional success. The third category, minority serving institutions, and then student fellowships, including predoctoral and postdoctoral fellowships, and finally, new investigators. I'll give definitions for each of these terms in the following slides. There are no specific RFAs for FASE grants. The PD just select the best fit for their research project and submit a proposal directly to that program. There are also no specific panels for FASE applications. They are reviewed in regular AFRI panels. In other words, you are most likely to review FASE applications in your own panel. The only exception is that an education and workforce development program, which houses the pre- and postdoc fellowships, does have its own RFA and its own review panels. This is an overview of the AFRI FASE grants. There are 3 major types. The box on the left, new investigator grants. This has no set-aside money. The middle box is a large category called strengthening grants, and 11.25% of every budget is set aside for these. The box on the right is pre- and postdoctoral fellowship programs, grants, and 3.75% of every funding is set aside for these. So 11.25% plus 3.75% is 15%. So a total of 15% of every funding has to be spent on FASE grants. Let's start with the orange box on the right, the pre- and postdoc fellowship grants. This is housed in the education and workforce development RFA. Again, you don't need to be an expert on this. This is just for your information. The education and workforce development RFA has 4 program focus areas, but only 2 of them are considered FASE. The project can address one of general AFRI topic areas, and there are 6 of those. The first area is enhancing agriculture literacy. This is for professional development for secondary school teachers and educational professionals, or PD STEP. This is not considered FASE. The second area is developing pathways. This is for research and extension experiences for undergraduates. Again, this is not considered FASE. The third and fourth areas are advancing science. This is for pre and postdoctoral fellowships. This is considered FASE. And to be eligible, the pre and postdoc fellow must be US citizen, US national, or permanent resident of the US. We are done with the fellowships. If you happen to be the panel manager for the fellowship programs, your MPO will give you additional information. But for other panel managers, you don't need to know the details of the fellowship program. Let's move on to the orange box to the left, new investigator grants. Our definition of new investigator is someone with less than 5 years of postgraduate career track experience. Our definition of career track is pretty loose, usually refers to a tenure track assistant professor position. But nowadays, many people are spending a lot of time somewhere between postdoc and their tenure track position. We do allow these people to apply as new investigators as long as they are within the first 5 years of their such a position, and their institution allows them to apply for their own grants. The PD may not have received competitively awarded federal research funds beyond the pre and postdoctoral grants or AFRI grants. I will say more about the AFRI grants later. The applicants do not need to be US citizens if they are associated with a US institution. This is because the official grantee is the institution rather than the individual. That's why it's okay to be a non-citizen. And this is different from the pre and postdoc fellows. And the project can be on research, education, and or extension. The proposal is written exactly the same as non-new investigators, except the PD will check a box indicating that they are eligible as a new investigator. So how are new investigator grants funded? Basically, there are two funding chances in a program. First, the proposal will compete with all the other standard proposals submitted to that panel. And if the new investigator grant is ranked above the funding cutoff, it will be funded by the program funds or regular money of the program. However, if the proposal falls below the funding cutoff line, but still in the fundable range, say high priority or medium priority, the program can decide to pick up such a new investigator below the line. But recall, there's no set-aside money for new investigators. So in order to find someone below the line, the program has to skip over someone just above the line. So this is often a difficult decision for the program to make, because on one hand, you very much want to find the last proposal above the line, but on the other hand, you also want to pick up someone below the line. In general, if you are already funding new investigators above the line, there's less pressure to pick up someone below the line. However, if you don't have any new investigator above the line, we strongly encourage you to consider funding someone below the line, because we believe it's very important to support someone who's just beginning their research career. I want to call your attention to something called PCASE, which stands for Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers. PCASE was established by President Lincoln in 1996. This is the highest honor bestowed by US government to outstanding scientists and engineers in early stages of their careers. The MPOs will nominate every new investigators who are US citizens or permanent residents, who demonstrate innovative research, science and technology frontiers relevant to NIFA, and who display commitment to community service through scientific leadership, public education, or community outreach. In order for an investigator to be nominated for PCASE award, their proposal has to be ranked in outstanding or high priority. And if a nominee is selected for the PCASE award, NIFA will add $250,000 to their existing award, and NIFA will extend the award for a couple more years. So this is a big deal. You should keep this in mind as you review new investigator proposals. We are done with the new investigators. Let's move on to the center box on strengthening grants. There are 3 ways to be eligible for strengthening grants. First, as I mentioned earlier, the EPSCoR states. For USD and NIFA, we have the 19 EPSCoR states. These are the states receiving the least amount of AFRI funding. And the list is calculated and reassessed each year. So every year we have a different list of EPSCoR states. The second category is small and mid-sized institutions with limited institutional success. And the third category is minority serving institutions, also with limited institutional success. USD EPSCoR states, as I mentioned, this is updated on a yearly basis. And this is the definition of USDA EPSCoR states. States having a funding level no higher than the 38th percentile of all states based on a 3-year rolling average of every funding levels, excluding FASE strengthening funds granted to EPSCoR states and small, mid-sized, and minority serving degree granting institutions. This is a very long definition, but essentially it means the lowest 19 states are in receiving AFRI funding. I'm not showing the current 19 states because, as I said, the states change year to year, and I don't want you to remember the wrong states. You can always find out the current states by going to the NIFA website for FASE and EPSCoR program. Here are some more definitions. So small and mid-sized institutions means the current total enrollment of 17,500 or less. And total enrollment means part-time plus full-time and graduate plus undergraduate. Minority serving institutions is defined as enrollment of single minority group or a combination of minority groups exceeds 50% of total enrollment. There are different definitions for minority serving institutions depending on what program you are applying to, but this is the definition we use for AFRI. And limited institutional success is defined as not among the most successful universities and colleges receiving federal funds for science, engineering, research, and development. And there's a table in the AFRI RFA with the top 100 universities and colleges. And the data is obtained from a National Science Foundation publication. Now we are done with the top 3 boxes. We'll move on to the strengthening grant types. First, the first 3 types, C grants, sabbatical grants, and equipment grants. These are the small strengthening grants, and they are limited to 7 pages of project narrative. C grants is intended for a collection of preliminary data leading to future standard application for AFRI funding. And the budget is limited to $200,000 over 2 years. Sabbatical grants, the NIFA will provide up to 1 year of salary and funds for travel and supplies. Sabbatical leave is typically for 1 year, but mini sabbaticals for a few months or even a few weeks are also appropriate for the program. Equipment grants are for purchase of a single piece of equipment, and up to $50,000 can be requested from NIFA. Equipment grants require matching. I won't go into the details here, but basically it's 1-to-1 match with non-federal dollars. The C sabbatical and equipment grants are reviewed together in the particular AFRI program that received them. And those 3 grant types are ranked relative to each other, competition only among those 3 grant types. And this is because these are 7-page grant proposals, and obviously they cannot be compared with the 18-page standard proposals. And keep in mind that C applications only need good ideas and not preliminary data, because the purpose of C grant is to allow the PD to collect preliminary data. And these are the standard version of strengthening applications. So we have strengthening standard, strengthening cap, strengthening conference, and so on. The application is written exactly the same as standard application, for example, 18 pages of narrative, except the PD checks a box that indicate they're eligible for FASE funding. Again, there are no specific RFAs. The proposals are mixed in with your other AFRI applications. So in other words, the strengthening standard are reviewed with the standard applications in the same panel. There are two chances for these grants to be funded. Like new investigators, first they compete with all the other applications. So no special consideration is given to these grants during the initial ranking. And after the initial ranking, if the proposal is ranked above the line, it will be funded by the program funds and not set-aside funds of the program. However, if they are ranked below the line and still in a fundable range, the program can use the set-aside funds to fund them. And this is different from new investigators because in the case of new investigators, you have to skip someone above the line in order to find a new investigator below the line. But in this case, you don't have to skip someone above the line. You just use the set-aside money. Obviously, some new investigator can also be from EBSCO states or small mid-sized institutions. So they can be funded by the set-aside money. So in that case, you'll be funding both as FASE standard strengthening grants and a new investigator at the same time. That would be the ideal situation. So the FASE 11.25% FASE fund can be used to fund either the small strengthening grants, C sabbatical equipment, or the regular standard strengthening grants. And the program can decide how to allocate the FASE funds. For example, you can fund 2 C grants plus 1 equipment grant plus 1 standard strengthening award. However, based on my own experience, 11.25% is not very much money, especially if your program budget is not very big. So typically, I can only fund 2 C grants and 1 standard strengthening grants. However, you can supplement your FASE funding with your program funds. But in that case, the program funds will need to be converted to FASE fund in order to fund a standard strengthening proposal. But that's something for your NPO to worry about. You don't have to worry about the conversion of funds. There are some nuances in FASE spending. Sometimes it happens that you don't have any eligible strengthening application to fund, either because you did not receive any or because they did not rank high enough to be funded. And since the FASE fund cannot be used to fund standard grants, you have to give your FASE funds to another program. But if you are lucky, the other program will be willing to swap their set-aside funds with program funds. In other words, you give them your set-aside funds and they give you the same amount of program funds. And both programs will remain the same amount, same budget. That will be the ideal situation. Then we come to the end of the FASE grants presentation. And since this is recording, I won't be able to answer your questions, but your program team, especially your program leader, can answer your questions about FASE grants. Thank you all for listening to this webinar.